And I'd like to introduce Susan Kelsey, who's the author and filmmaker and has lived in the Saguenay neighborhood of Chicago on the site of Billy Caldwell's former 1,600-acre reserve land received during the 1833 Treaty of Chicago. She found a bronze plaque signifying the boundary of the historic Fort Dearborn and Caldwell's Reserve and wanted to learn more about the history of Billy Caldwell, or Chief Saguenay. Over the course of 25 years, Kelsey followed the trail of Caldwell through 2 countries, 13 states, and thousands of miles, and met new friends along the journey, intersecting stories about Irish Native Americans and learning about the land we call America. So I'd like to welcome Susan, and I appreciate you holding your questions. You can certainly put them in the chat if you would like. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be able to share the Billy Caldwell story. And it's now been 28 years, so I need to update my slide. But thanks to Joseph Niamer and John Harris, and it's an honor to be here. It's really meant, I never intended to write a book. I had written 3 Lake Forest books, and the publisher asked me if I would write a 4th one, and I said, no, I would not. But I have been, interested in doing research on a Native American by the name of Billy Caldwell. When they be interested in that book, and of course they accepted it. So it's really been kind of 28 years of a series of coincidences, and you can go ahead to the next slide. I found this quote, and by the way, I have a speech disability, so if you don't understand something, just put it in the questions and we'll figure it out later. But I like this quote about mysteries because it promises action and adventure, and for the most part, presents black and white moral choices. They challenge our intellect through clues and the unknowing that keeps us interested in life and learning and developing ourselves. And I really felt that way about following Billy Caldwell around for 28 years, that it was a mystery, and a lot of it's been answered, but there's a lot that hasn't been answered. So I have about 40 slides. We're going to do some background information, and then I'll take you on a little journey about how I approached this book and how I kind of met people throughout the journey that helped me do the research, but also answer some of the questions I had. And then we kind of come full circle back to Chicago and then a conclusion. So next slide. And thanks, Lynn, for moving my slides forward. So this is a favorite picture that I found. It's there is not a known photo of Billy Caldwell. That's Billy, Millie. And but this is done by an artist in Ohio, and the artist was Al Higdon. He died in 2014. But this was his interpretation of what he thought Billy Caldwell might look like. And on the right-hand side is a representation of Billy's father, William Caldwell. Now we have images of William, and that's what he looks like. And then next to him is the artist's interpretation of what Billy looks like. Billy was born to a Mohawk mother, and his father was from Ireland and served in the British Army up in Canada. So Billy was what they call a Métis, half Irish, half indigenous. In the United States, of course, we say Native American, and up in Canada, they would be First Nation. In the center of the photo is Tecumseh. Now, Tecumseh's age was between the father and son of Caldwell. So Tecumseh and the senior Caldwell were comrades in battle, and I suspect he was a good mentor for the younger Caldwell, Billy Caldwell. And Billy served with him on a lot of battles, and Tecumseh died next to Millie during the Battle of 1812. Next is a British soldier, and on the left is General Isaac Brock that was in the Battle of the Thames. So I like this image because it gives you a little bit of an idea. In some slides, future slides, we talk a little bit about what Billy Caldwell looks like, but I'll go ahead and move to the next slide. So a little bit of background information. Not everybody, wait, the other way. A little bit of background information. There we go. According to the Smithsonian American Indian Museum, American Indians have lived in this hemisphere for at least 15 to 20,000 years. Around the time Columbus shows up, there's somewhere between 2 and 18 million in the North American territory. By the end of in the 1880s, that's reduced down to about 250,000. And that's due to the smallpox and really the genocide that happened to the Native Americans in this country. But the good news is we're about 5 million Native Americans today. That represents about 600 sovereign nations, and about 374 treaties were signed during the 1800s between the U.S. and the Native American nations. And unfortunately, almost every one of them were broken. We can go to the next slide. So specifically here in Illinois, we have about 100,000 Native Americans that live in the state of Illinois. And no sovereign nation exists here in Illinois. There are tribes in Wisconsin and Michigan, but in Illinois, we have no federally recognized tribe. This land was held by the Illini and Sauk, Kickapoo, Fox, and Ojibwe, Ottawa, and of course, the recent ones, the Potawatomi. And there's a lot of representation here in Illinois for Native Americans. Of course, one of my favorites, the Midwest Soaring Foundation. There's the American Indian Center, American Indian Association of Illinois, which I didn't put on there. The Mitchell Museum up in Evanston, a great museum. And a relatively new Chamber of Commerce, the Native American Chamber of Commerce, started by Andrew Jackson. So that's in Chicago, working with businesses owned by Native Americans. Next slide. So let's go on a journey. Like I said, I have about 40 slides. If you have questions, throw them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. I lived in Chicago, down by Michigan and where the Wacker, where the Chicago River is. And a lot of you probably have walked by this piece of art, and it's on the bridge, you know, the bridges that go up when the boats need to get out to the lake. And I was kind of new to Chicago. I came in 1984, and I really didn't know much about Chicago. And I'd walk by this piece, and I'd read the inscription on it, and get kind of mesmerized by the drama in it, and started wanting to learn a little bit more about what's happening and what Chicago was. And of course, that location was the site of the Fort Dearborn. If you haven't been down there, there's some informational plaques there and some bronze plaques in the sidewalk, so you can actually see where the fort was. But I started going to the Newberry Library, and that time it was the Chicago History Museum, and just learning a little bit about, you know, what Chicago was about. I was walking on streets called, you know, Kinsey Street, Wells, Bobian, Dearborn, LaSalle, and I'd heard of Billy Caldwell and Sauganash. And but I didn't really know much about it. So you can go to the next slide. And it was in 1993, I moved from the city up to the Sauganash neighborhood. And that's located on the north side of Chicago. If you go one more street light, you're out of the Chicago city limits in Muskogee. But this is a community on the north side of Chicago, bordered by Devon Avenue. It's by Peterson and Cicero, and I lived on Forest Glen. It was a diagonal street and it intersected with a street called Caldwell. And I was walking around the neighborhood, and of course, this is before the internet, and I see this plaque on the ground that talks about this old treaty and a tree that stood there. Well, that was kind of romantic, and the boundary of the Fort Dearborn, and this man by the name of Billy Caldwell, and then the Chief Sauganash. And I really got curious, who was this guy and why was the neighborhood named after him? And so I went down and did some more research. And incidentally, it's kind of interesting. I went back to the Chicago History Center about 2 years ago and looked to see if they had any more new information, what I call the dusty old papers. And they really haven't added much to the collection. It's the same information I found 28 years ago, but that was really about all I can find. This was first before the internet. And then, life happens. I got married and had kids and had jobs and stuff. So I really kind of put the story down for a while, and then moved up to Lake Forest, Illinois, 30 miles north. You can go to the next slide. And I didn't really think much about it. So here's the Commonwealth Reserve at the, you can see the I-94 north and south there of Peterson, and kind of faint in there, but running along the bottom of that square is that the north branch of the Chicago River. So Caldwell received this land, 1,600 acres, as part of the treaty he helped negotiate. And it was one of the first times ever that individuals received something in a treaty. And Caldwell got 1,600 acres. We'll talk about his friends in just a minute. But I suspect he wanted it along the branch of the river where he could have access to resources and food and water. And, they didn't really use the river for transportation by then. But, it was a nice piece of land. From what I understand, he never really lived on the land. He ended up selling most of it off. The street address is down at the intersection. In the bottom right side, you'll see the intersection of Rogers and Caldwell Avenue and Kilbourne. It's almost down on that dotted maroon line. And that's where the plaque is. You can Google it too, and somewhere on Google it'll tell you where it is too. But I lived on Forest Glen, the diagonal street there. And so Caldwell sold off most of the land. There is a piece of it that I've read about that maybe it wasn't transferred properly, and so it might be in play. But that part never really interested me. I wasn't really a treasure hunter. I was more interested in learning more about what kind of, where did he come from, and why did he leave, and where did he go when he left? So, like I said, you can go to the next slide. I moved up to Lake Forest. I started learning about the Green Bay Trail up there, and I found some really interesting people. Dennis Downs, he's an artist and a researcher. You probably have seen him with his trail marker trees. Dan Malone, a Chicago archaeologist. So I started meeting some people and, started picking up the story again. And it was about 2014. My kids were growing and in school, and I said to my mom, who was alive at the time, I said, do you think we could follow Caldwell's trail? And I felt like I didn't really know him that well. I found everything I could on the internet, but maybe we could drive and follow along. And I had no idea what we would find, but I thought, would you be interested in going, Mom? And of course, her bag was packed. And so I loaded all my research into the car and we drove over to Detroit. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. And we stopped at my mom's sister's house on the way, and she pulled out the family Bible. And interestingly, my mom's side of the family came from the area we were going to. So it was an interesting journey because not only was I learning about Caldwell, but I was learning about my own family history as we were doing that. But Caldwell was born on the very beginning of this trail, Old Fort Niagara. It's now in the state of New York. It was under several flags. There was under the British flag, Spanish flag, French flag, American flag. If you've been to Niagara Falls, it's north of Niagara Falls, about 20 minutes or maybe a little bit longer. But it's on the edge of the Ontario River. And Caldwell's mother was part of the Mohawk Nation, which eventually folded into the six nations in Canada. And his father came over, like I said, from Ireland and was part of the fort there. We'll just stay on the slide for just a minute, because this is Caldwell's trail that I followed. He then migrates down to Brantford, where the Six Nations has their several 100-acre reserve. His father, underneath the red car is the town of Amherstburg. It's in Canada, right across from Detroit. And his father, William Caldwell, founded Amherstburg. So when Caldwell was about 7, they brought him down there, and but Caldwell went to school in Detroit, so it was very fluid, going between what was then, Amherstburg over to Detroit and back. Then as Caldwell starts to mature and he's following a career as a fur trader, he migrates over to St. Joseph, Michigan, which is on the eastern side of Lake Michigan. And then he eventually comes over to Chicago first time around 1804. There's really just a handful of people in Chicago. And then stays there until about 1835. And then he leaves with much of the Native Americans due to the treaty, crosses the Mississippi at Oquaca, goes down through Mount Pleasant, and then heads south down to Missouri to St. Joseph. So one of the questions I had was, why did he go to St. Joseph? A lot of the other natives that migrated, and I have a map later, we'll look at the migration and the diaspora and the natives. But why did he choose Missouri? And then in the end, he ends up in Council Bluffs. And I need to add to this map because his legacy tribe is the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation, and they're in Mayetta, Kansas, and we'll talk about them. So you can go to the next slide. But that trail, I've been back and forth several times. This is Fort Niamer. You can see it's this beautiful French-style building. The British were allowed in the fort and around there. There's a big wooden stockade around the fort, and all the natives were forced to stay on the outside of the fort. So you can imagine them camping there. This is, of course, a demonstration of the British doing their cannon into the water. And so I went here, and there wasn't much available about Caldwell. I learned a lot about what it was like to be a Native American and me living outside that fort. The year Caldwell was born, 1780, he was born in March on St. Patrick's Day. And that year, that following winter, was one of the harshest winters ever. And 6 feet of snow. In the spring, they found horses and people buried under the snow. And little baby Caldwell survived that winter. So he was a tough guy. But it was kind of, in terms of research, it was a dead end. I didn't really find much, but there's nothing like really going to the place and kind of walking in the footsteps of what they did. So next slide, 7, I told you Caldwell's father remarries a French-Canadian woman. And she read the law, and the law said the firstborn male has hereditary rights to the land. She told her husband, go up there and get your son, bring him down here. So they brought him down. This is the leftover of Fort Malden. There's not much left there, but what you're looking at is the Detroit River. On your right is the north end, on the left side is the south end. If you go, these are some islands in the middle of the river. If you go across the river and north a little bit, that's the city of Detroit. So you can't really see the city of Detroit. We're a little bit further south of Windsor and south of where the city would be, but it gives you an idea of the scope of crossing this river. It's a very fast, dangerous river. History-wise, my parents, my father's side were Canadian, and the river froze, and my great-great-grandfather told everybody to put all their clothes on, and they walked over to Detroit, and that's how I got to Detroit. in Detroit, a legal immigrant. So that's Amherstburg. And my mom and I got here, and we went to the chamber, and there wasn't a whole lot of information. So we went, of course, if you want to get information, go to the coffee shop. So we went there and talked to some of the old timers, and said they're asking what we were up to while we're looking for information on a Native American between 1810 and 1820, or 1805 to 1820, and very specific period. And they told us to go to the Marsh Genealogy Center, it was just up the street, up on the second level. And this was an incredible resource. We walked upstairs, two wonderful ladies up there, and yes, can we help you? And well, I'm looking for the information on Billy Caldwell. He was here, on 1805 or 1800, maybe 1795. And she came out with a file about 2 inches thick, and it had everything in there, letters he had written to the Indian Department, and family genealogy charts, and a photo of his brother, his half stepbrother. And it was really, I almost fell over. I was almost crying, because it was the first real sign we had that there was a man, Billy Caldwell. And of course, none of it had been scanned and put into the internet. So his mother's name was Rising Sun. And the woman asked me, would you like me to copy this? And I gave her a $100 bill for donations, and absolutely, yes. So you can go to the next slide. She's copying it. I look over her shoulder, and sure enough, there's a yoga studio on the other side, Rising Sun. There was just all these strange coincidences as, we're taking this journey to eventually to Marietta, Kansas. So if you go to the next slide, so now let's move to Chicago. I know this is a busy drawing, but let me just explain it. You're looking at a map of Chicago around 1835. Of course, the Chicago River has now been straightened out, but you can see the beginning of a grid. This is before the 1871 fire, but inside that little peninsula area on the south side of the river there is the fort. You can see a little bit of an outline there. And Caldwell had a house on the north side. He didn't really want to be where everyone was. John Kinsey was on a house there. Laframbeau, of course, Beaumien was there. And I'm drawing a blank. The first black guy that was in Chicago, somebody will put it in the chat, his statue is on Michigan Avenue. DuSable, yeah, thanks, John. And if you go to the next slide, what I did is I highlighted something, because I found as I went through this journey in Amherstburg, in Detroit, St. Joseph, Michigan, Chicago, and then all the way to Iowa, and then all the way to Kansas and Oklahoma, I found these names, these friends and comrades of Caldwell. Anton Wilmette, of course, he received land, and that's Wilmette, Illinois. Here's Beaumien. His title was Indian trader and tavern owner. You see William Caldwell here, and they had already given him the title of chief. We'll talk about that. And then on the right-hand side, Alexander Robinson, Indian trader, stockade enclosure, and he must have had 6-inch saplings around his house. Mark Beaumien, another one, Medor Beaumien, you'll see this name again, Moroso, and Laframboise. I started these names because I kept finding them, and a lot of them left with Caldwell. And it really helped me put clues together about why did Caldwell leave, and some of them stayed here in Chicago. So go ahead and go to the next slide. This is really the significant event. This is a postcard I got off of eBay, and I like it because I imagine it's kind of what it looked like. You had this white settlement, European white settlement in Chicago. This is 1835. You have the Native Americans. Caldwell was given the title of chief by the white people. I like to say he was in the right place at the right time to get this title. And he represented the Potawatomi, the Ojibwa, and the Ottawa. And it was really this event where he signed one of the final treaties, 1833, to cede 5 million acres. And there were a lot of treaties signed. The actual Chicago area was signed earlier. These dates are so important, I don't even try to remember them. I always have to keep looking them back up to remember the exact date, but the actual city of Chicago area was ceded much earlier. And then 1829 was a big treaty that Caldwell was involved in, but this last one was 1833. Also, you had President Andrew Jackson in 1830 in the Indian Removal Act. So you had a lot of things converging at the same time. In this particular act, they had a provision in the treaty that within 2 years, all the Native Americans must leave the Chicago area. And this is the reason there is no tribe in the state of Illinois. And I have a migration map we're going to look at. Some of the tribes went north to Canada, some went over to Michigan, some went up to Wisconsin. And so we'll talk about that. But you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I like to talk about Caldwell's friends. And the next slide is his friend. And this is the migration one. So let's talk about this. I know it's very busy. Let's just break it down here. The green area is where a lot of we're just talking about the Potawatomi here. A lot of the Potawatomi tribes were. And then if you look at the purple areas, that's the land they received in the treaties. So in particular, this United Bands, 1835, so I said they had to leave in 1835 to 1846. Now that's an important one because that's the one we're going to be talking about. The other two purple areas down below is the Prairie Band, and you see they are there in 1861. That's also an important date. And then the bottom purple rectangle is the Mission Band, and we'll talk about why there's a Prairie Band and why there's a Mission Band. All in all, there's 9 Potawatomi tribes. And so if you look at the red lines up above, and I won't go through them all, but you see a lot of movement. And the green lines were the migration after the treaties. You see they moved west to Kansas, Oklahoma. You see one green line heading down to Mexico. Some of them went down there. I've had the honor of meeting a lot of these tribes, the Wisconsin tribes, Michigan tribes, Canadian tribes. They get together once a year and have a powwow. And I can only imagine, I haven't been to it, but non-native allies are invited to go, and I will be going. But they get together every year and they talk about a lot of things. And the Prairie Band was the most remote band when they left. And so that plays into some of the documentary film that we're doing, because they were what you would say the most pure in terms of their language and their culture and their traditions, because they weren't with the rest of the tribes. So, all right, go ahead to the next slide. And so I like to talk about Caldwell's friends. And it's interesting, before the internet, I don't know how the pronunciation of things. So I always pronounced it Shimona. And then it wasn't until I met the Potawatomi tribe in Kansas that I was corrected. It's Chamonix. And it's actually more of a French pronunciation. And I suspect the A should be an I instead of that. But Caldwell and Chamonix were very good friends. And you can see from the date on this rock, 59, that he lived a little bit longer than Caldwell. He'd go back and forth and see Caldwell in Iowa. And Chamonix was, he also got land, and it's out by DeKalb. It's called Chamonix Grove. And one trip when he went out to see Caldwell, some of the white settlers stole his land. And so when he came back, he really got along well with the pioneers and frontiermen. So he had some friends that said, well, come on down here to Morris, Illinois, and we'll let you live here for the rest of your life. And when he died, they put his family here at Evergreen Cemetery, and he died here. But one of the questions I always had was, why did he stay here? And why did Caldwell leave? And if you go to the next slide, this is Caldwell's other buddy, Alexander Robinson. So this Robinson Reserve is up by Lawrence Road in Chicago and River Road. So it runs along the Des Plaines River on both sides. And Robinson had died here, so you can't see his name very well, but 1872. So he lives a lot longer than Caldwell. Caldwell died in 1841. And Robinson's buried on this reserve. My friend Dan Malone found the old headstones that have been buried and then hidden, but they're at Schiller Park, I think. And we've walked the Robinson Reserve, and of course it's around water where they have some resources. And Laframbeau had some property down there, but Laframbeau left with Caldwell, but Robinson stayed. So these were some of the questions I had about, what happened to Caldwell when he left. So if you go to the next slide, I went to school in Iowa City. My son ended up going to Iowa City. My other son went and now lives in Des Moines. So I feel like I was a big part of my life. And I've been to Council Bluffs probably 24 times now. But we dropped my son off in Iowa City. I was with my husband and I said, what do you think? Do you think we can drive to Council Bluffs? And maybe we can find something about Caldwell. And so my husband's a pretty good sport. Yeah, let's go. So we drove to Council Bluffs, and you can go ahead in the next slide. And we get to Council Bluffs, and all we find is this rock. There's two rocks, actually, and there's really nothing that talks about Caldwell, nothing with his name on it, nothing that mentions that he was there. These rocks, if you've ever been to Council Bluffs, it's way high up on a bluff over the Missouri River. And so it's about 200 feet high. You have the Missouri River, just like the Mississippi, running north and south. On the west side of the Missouri River is the state of Nebraska, flat as a pancake. So on this bluff, a blockhouse, a military blockhouse was built up there. And it was built for Caldwell and for the tribe that would be moving there. So the blockhouse was removed. And again, I'm not good at dates. I have to keep looking them up, but it was torn down. But these stones with these plaques were put there. And so then I had read that Caldwell was buried in a Catholic cemetery. So this time it's about 7:00 on a summer night. And my husband and I go over and we read every gravestone, and we found an old pauper cemetery from 1850 called the Green Valley Cemetery. And we went down in the valley and read all those kind of metal and wrought iron gravestones, and we didn't find anything. So we got out of there because I was afraid we get trapped in there for the night. So we drove home, and I wrote a letter to the mayor of Council Bluffs, and I said, I've written this book about Caldwell. He's a pretty important man in Chicago, and he was an important leader and was a significant leader in the city of Council Bluffs. And would you be open to a historical marker or something that we could do to recognize him dying there in Council Bluffs? And so he put me in touch with a woman. I believe now she's 86. I've known her, 10 years or so now. And her name is Mary Lou McGinn. And she was Irish Catholic. Again, you remember Caldwell's Irish and studied Jesuit. So Mary Lou was a fan of Caldwell longer than I was a fan of Caldwell, and really helped kind of put all the pieces together in Council Bluffs. So we did the, let's see what's next. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So Mary Lou was always game. I said, you want to go down to St. Joseph, Missouri, and see if we can find out why Caldwell went down to Missouri. So before we went, I did some research, and I keep telling my children, you can't find everything on Google. Sometimes you just gotta, go and walk it. You gotta go to the libraries and pull out the research documents and periodicals that have not been scanned yet. And I found this in Missouri. I'll read it to you. It's about a man by the name of Todd. And the Potawatomis, when Caldwell left Chicago, they went to St. Joseph, Missouri. If you've never been there, that's where the Pony Express started. And it's and if you know your history, you know the French came up from the south, from the St. Louis area and from the New Orleans area. They came up the big rivers, up the Mississippi and up the Missouri River. And so north of Iowa was still kind of wild. It was Indian territory. Sioux Indian were up there, and they were pretty tough Indians. So I suspect Caldwell wanted to go south where he could be with French in the traders. He was still a fur trader, although that career was waning out. But he went south. And so in this land was buying the issue house. So Fort Leavenworth is on the west side of the Missouri River. I think that's Kansas. On the east side of the river is the issue house where they actually give out the bacon and the flour and everything. And there was an issue house there, and the Potawatomis that's where they went when they left Chicago. There was an old chief called Colonel Caldwell. Well, that's our guy. And known by the warriors as Songanash. Again, spelled different in a very French or phonetic way. He pitched his wigwam in Mr. Todd's yard. He took pleasure in reciting his adventures in broken English. He claimed he was with Tecumseh at the Battle of Thames. Well, we know that to be true. And he would say, before the battle, Tecumseh said, "You go to the left, and I will go to the right. But farewell, you will never see me again." And Songanash, we have a little information on him. He was straight, 6 feet tall, 3 inches high, kind, genial, and it goes on. So we get a little bit more information about him. And you can go to the next slide. And I know this isn't really in good focus, but just bear with me. The kind of mess of lines on the left-hand side where it says Beverly Junction, that was where the issue house was. It was a confluence of railroads, rivers, roads, Indian trails. And that's where Caldwell was. And so I said to Mary Lou up in Council Bluffs, we want to drive down there and just see what we can find. I find more stuff like that. And I knew that this man, Todd, then I got this map from the 1830s, and I suspected he would have land. So if you look on the bottom right on the map, you see his plot, M. Todd. And then I wondered, well, there's a cemetery, you see the cross. In old maps, they would put, schoolhouse, a little steeple for a schoolhouse, and the crosses for cemetery. I said, Mary Lou, what do you think? Maybe he's married, some of his family members are married there. Maybe we can find more information. So we drove, took a couple hours to get down there. You can go to the next slide. And sure enough, we find Todd's settlement with a cemetery. You can go to the next slide. We found Todd's actual gravestone there. You can barely see it. Joseph Todd on there. And this is where Caldwell camped. And I did some research, and part of it is my theory that he wanted to be where the action was. There was the Oregon Trail was starting to get going. The fur trading was still going on up on the Missouri River. This man needed a job. He needed to be able to provide for his family. But also, it was a beautiful area. It's got rolling hills. You have the ascent of the Missouri River. But the Missouri, the state of Missouri was in the Louisiana Purchase, which was many years earlier in 1804. But this last little triangle in this flat county here had not been ratified. And finally, when all these Potawatomis and Indians were showing up on this property, some of the white settlers were saying it's time to get them to go over to Kansas and Oklahoma, which if you look at the 1835 maps, it says Indian country. And they must have not had the foresight to see the country was going to grow west of there. But that's where they wanted to move them. So within 18 months, Caldwell is removed from this area. And you can go to the next slide. He had already visited Council Bluffs and decided he wanted to go there. And the tribe kind of split up a little bit. Some of them decided to go to Kansas, Oklahoma. But here's the beautiful Council Bluffs. On this right are the Bluffs. That's where Council Bluffs gets their name from. The Los Hills. Again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. But it's a geographical phenomenon from the glaciers. When the glaciers retreated, creating these kind of sandy, dusty bluffs. Council Bluffs is built on the top, and you can see Nebraska down there, and the Missouri is hidden by the trees there. But Caldwell decides to come up here. It takes them 23 days to get up here, and they bring a ferry boat with some of the sick and the women and children. This is his new home. So go ahead and move to the next slide. So he arrives 1838. Father Desmet comes from the Catholic Church. So we do have some Catholic records. And Mary Lou McGinn, Irish Catholic, has some of these records and talked about some of these things. Caldwell isn't here very long. He dies. So 1838, he dies 3 years later, 1841. But he's here a couple of years. And when I was with Mary Lou and her friend Darlene, we're at the pancake shop, of course, and they said, Caldwell built a mill here in Council Bluffs, and I had not read that, and so we went to the Council Bluffs library and we found some photos, and Darlene had a map of where the mill was. So the mill was 40 feet long. So this river is called Mosquito River. It's about 2 or 3 miles northwest of the city of Council Bluffs. And you can imagine why it's called the Mosquito River. I've walked it several miles each way. And it empties into the Missouri River. But they built a saw and grist mill. And they built this dam 8 feet high. It was filled with logs and earth and everything to force the water to go through the water wheel. Therefore, they would grind up some grist for the cattle. And I think they did this Caldwell had to pay for this out of his own pocket. He paid about $3,000 for it. And my theory is that even though the beginning of the Oregon Trail is further south by St. Joseph, we're in 1841. The Mormons are coming in a short 5 years, and they're a feeder into the Mormon Trail, but also the Oregon Trail. And so Caldwell's thinking about commerce. Fur trading is dead. The Europeans are done with their, with the furs from America. So Caldwell needed to find a way, this is Kelsey's theory, find a way to take care of his tribe. He has, and there's varying sources, between 500 and 2,000 people living here with him. And there's his tribe, there's a couple of other tribes. Wabansi has his tribe around here. There's up to at least 5 different groups. They're not individual tribes. A lot of them are Potawatomi. There's a lot of French Canadian Native Americans here. So if you go to the next slide, Darlene and Mary Lou took me to the site of Mosquito River, and they told me, you can go down there and find the mill. So we indeed found the footings of where the mill was. And you can see in the middle of the river some posts. I'm not saying this is Caldwell's mill. There were several mill, and it's in my book, several mill for several decades later in this same location, because it was a bend in the river. You could see the rapids. But we did find some, and I don't know if I have another slide of it all, but we found some of the footings of the mill. So it was kind of neat how they were entrepreneurial. Yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide. Here's the Oregon Trail. It starts up in Council Bluffs. You see the Mormon Trail that was, I suspect, kind of a dirt trail, around 1841. And as the Mormons come in 1846, the Mormons come into Iowa, and then 1841, I told you those dates on that purple map. 1841 was a significant date. Caldwell dies Lafremont takes over as chief of the tribe. Joseph Lafremont signs another treaty, 1841. The tribe moves west. And let's see, why don't you go to the next slide? So I told you the mayor said we can do a memorial. Mary Lou and I raised $4,000. This is in the Old Catholic Cemetery. Happy to give GPS coordinates to this, and it's open. You can always go. Every time I go there, somebody's leaving something. You know, and there's the 3 feathers, the Irish flag. A lot of people leave tobacco and smudge and flowers on here, and it's kind of neat. People that just stop by on their way out west and leave something. But go ahead and go to the next slide. I told you they moved west. So again, Mary Lou and my mom, you guys want to take another trip? We went to Silver Lake, Kansas, and the gravestone on the left is a little hard to read. I can read it for you. Joseph Lafremont, that says chief, that's the middle word there, of the, and then the word that's bent up, Potawatomis. So, and I told you his friends moved with him. There's Manor, Momian, another Momian, and they moved. And it was at this point, the Potawatomi split into 2 tribes. And it was a philosophical difference. And that's why you have 2 tribes, one in Kansas, and the one in Kansas is called Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. That is Caldwell's legacy tribe. The one that went south is the one that was here in Silver Lake, went down to Shawnee, Oklahoma. That's Citizen Band Potawatomi Nation. The name indicated they accepted citizen in the United States. The Prairie Band gave me a lot of insight to Caldwell. They did not accept citizen and allotment for many years, almost cost them their nation. But they negotiated another treaty, 1861, and they have an 11 by 11 square mile. They had 5 million acres reduced down to 11 by 11 square mile reservation in Mayetta, Kansas. That's 25 miles north of Topeka, Kansas. So I told you, gave me a little insight into Caldwell about why I thought he left Chicago. In the Prairie Band Potawatomi, well, go to the next slide and let's talk about them. I'm telling you, it's coming back full circle. And go to the next slide. In 2016, the Prairie Band Potawatomi purchased Chief Chamonix's land back from DeKalb, Illinois. And they bought 1,280 acres. They're still in negotiation, and I don't know if it's an official lawsuit, but they are working with the American government because the land was really never properly conveyed, and it really is the Potawatomi land. But they bought it back, and it was really their first land back in the state of Illinois. And so I had been reaching out to them for a while, and I sent them an email, and I said, I'm an Irish white woman, and and of course I started this research before, 28 years ago, not really understanding the delicacies of being a white woman researching a Native American. But I reached out to them in an email and said, I'm a white woman, and I'd be interested in. I've written this book; it's been published, and I've been researching Caldwell for many years. And now I would be very interested in working on a documentary with you. So if you go to the next slide, after several meetings, I went out there to meet them. I was interviewed by the elders for 4 hours. I met with the tribal council several times. And now, today, I have an official partnership with them. It's a resolution that they passed and they voted on and passed and notarized, and an official partnership, and we're producing a documentary film. And it's fascinating because their story is the Billy Caldwell story. And what I'm learning about them is really making a lot of sense now about why I think Caldwell left Chicago and why he didn't stay in Chicago with his land. And, it really goes back to his heritage, where he was born in Canada, and his relationship with his father and his brothers and sisters, but his friends as he left him, as he moved his way west. So let me see if I have any more slides. I guess that's it. Go to the last slide. So really what started out, go to the last slide, everybody. What really started as a hobby turned into a passion, and as turns into obsessions. You never know where it's going to lead you. An interest in politics really led me on an adventure for the past 28 years. And I really encourage you to follow your passions and your dreams. And I've met a lot of beautiful people along the way. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. Does Billy Caldwell have any direct descendants that you met?
Yeah, I've been reached out to 2 times now. So and actually a number of people reach out to me with fascinating, and those are the calls I love to get. I'll get a call and Susan, my name is. And so I was reached out in 2016. A man, he lives in Kansas City, and we did his DNA, and he was mostly African American, and some Native American, and a good healthy percentage of Irish. So there's a possibility. I did not have any luck finding the missing link. I went back in his family. I had a missing link. I've gone as far as I can in Caldwell's family. I have some theories. Then I was at Indigenous Day in Chicago this past November 11th. And the Canadian Potawatomi from Walpole Island came over to me and said that a descendant of Billy Caldwell's lives there. So now I'm in touch with him. I will be flying up to film him. He'll be part of the film. And I don't know if we'll ever know, but I'm willing to follow the leads. I'm willing to work with people. And again, I think it's just interesting. But almost all the research I read said he had no descendants. But, we keep researching. Thank you, Lisa. What else? I can't see the questions, Lynn. Maybe you can read them.
Oh, there's a question about the street address of the plaque. Do you know
I don't know the address. It's the intersection of Caldwell, Kilbourne, and Rogers.
Okay, great. Do you know much more about him as a person? Did you read anything or get any information about his personal qualities or his interests? I mean, other than what he was doing in terms of how he was supporting his band and his
Right.
work.
That was one thing that really motivated me. And I have to say, if you're really interested in that, you must read James Clifton. And I read James Clifton, and he researched the Potawatomi. And it wasn't until I got to Mayetta, Kansas, and I've been there about 4 or 5 times now, that they shared with me, they formally adopted James Clifton. And James Clifton spent so much time with the Potawatomi and actually met people that had been, first generation after the 1841 removal. And James Clifton had some insight into Caldwell. So I wouldn't be so brazen to say that I understand Caldwell. I suspect he was very charismatic. He sounds like a very powerful man with a lot of charisma. But James Clifton's study really gives you a lot of insight into what he thinks with his relationship with his father. And I can only imagine that he was born an Indian, and then he was moved to Amherstburg, where he lived more of a British life. he was always proud of his title, captain in the British Army.
Okay.
And then he moved to Chicago and he was American. And then, in my opinion, he died an Indian.
Cool. Are there other questions for Susan? Well, we'd like to thank you so much, Susan, and encourage everyone to purchase the book that she's written about Billy Caldwell. It's available on Amazon.
Well, thank you. All donations go to Midwest Soaring Foundation all profits from the book go to Midwest Soaring Foundation. So,
oh, wow. Wonderful. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Bye,
Susan.
everyone.
Well, we'll go ahead and close our presentation today. We thank you all for joining and sharing this wonderful information.